Welcome to another edition of the 66 to 87 podcast here on DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcasting Network. I'm Tom Reed and joined as always by Dave Molinari. Dave was just got home a couple of days ago. We're thankful to have him back after a long trip. A good ending to the trip out west, Western Canada and Seattle. And by the time you're listening to this, the teams already have probably gone to Washington to play them. But Dave, that trip that you were on kind of ended in a rough way for the hottest Penguin on the team. And that's where I want to start today. Jake Guentzel, who's just been having a terrific season and he's been on a heater in the last couple of weeks. What does this injury mean? Let's start there. And how do they replace him?
Well, they probably don't replace him. They don't have anybody sitting around who's capable of coming in and putting together a 13-game scoring streak and scoring 7 goals in 4 games the way Guentzel did up to the time that he was injured. But they do have a couple of guys, certainly a couple of top 6 wingers who are underachieving in terms of what they've contributed offensively this year. And this would seem like a very good time for one or both to step up, those two being Kasperi Kapanen, who apparently is going to move on to the top line with Crosby and Rodriguez, and Jason Zucker. Zucker has 1 goal in the past 19 games as they prepare to play Washington on Friday night. And Kapanen has 1 in the past 12. And I think it's not a stretch to say that the Penguins reasonably expected a lot more productivity out of both of them.
Yeah, and to get a little bit more in depth into this topic, Dave wrote about this in the Friday Insider. For all of our listeners that are subscribers, please read that. It's a awesome read every week. Covers our 3 major pro sports teams with little nuggets and stuff that you may not be able to find anywhere else. Dave, with Zucker, it seems like we're talking about this all the time. It's almost like an evergreen conversation with just him, a good player, but needs to start scoring. With Kapanen, I don't know. We talked about him at the beginning of the season as like could be this X factor, especially with Crosby out. I mean, his numbers are okay. He's got like 5 goals, 9 assists, but just was on a 4-game road trip where he didn't have a point. And I think there's times when watching him that you watch him play, you watch him skate, and you just expect more. I don't know, maybe that's me, but I watch him and I'm like, this guy has more to offer, and why isn't it resulting in some kind of points or goals? Just your thoughts on him since he's been back.
Well, I mean, I think he has been an X factor. An X factor doesn't have to necessarily work out in a positive way. He was a key variable for them, and if he was performing to expectations, I think they'd probably be a little higher in the standings. I don't have any issues at all with Zucker's work ethic. I mean, he operates in the high traffic areas. He seems to do everything but score. Kapanen, on the other hand, he seems to have developed an alarming habit of pulling up short after he carries the puck into the zone, or when he's carrying the puck in the zone, rather than attacking the net. And I don't know if that's a reflection of a lack of confidence, or if he's simply reluctant to go into those areas, but that's something he's got to get over. He's a great skater and he's got a good shot, but you've got to be more assertive than he has been. And until that happens, I don't know that you're going to get a whole lot more production out of him.
And this is a critical time. We're getting toward the new year. This is where things start to really pick up. And you've lost. I mean, no offense to Sidney Crosby, who's the franchise's best player, but Jake Guentzel has been their best player. He's been, from start of the season to now, other than a non-goalie, he has been the guy that they could rely on to score goals. So someone is going to have to step up in his absence, assuming, again, with the team's reporting it as an upper body injury. I think we kind of think it might be a hand, something to do with maybe blocking a shot in Seattle. well, that's speculation. But Dave, they've got to get the production from one of these two guys, if not both.
Yeah, I think both, and probably even some other people. Gensel was just a score without equal, and it's not realistic to expect one guy to pick up the load that he was carrying. But they do have guys like Zucker and Kapanen who definitely are capable of contributing more, and this is certainly the time that the Penguins need them to do it.
One good thing we've talked about this as a lead topic in one of our most recent shows is just the idea of Crosby's back. We kind of knew at some point he'd probably get it going a little bit. That is certainly a positive. He's starting to put up points, kind of what we're used to with him as he finds his game again. Maybe that can be a spark, or like helping these guys play. Now, if I remember correctly, he and Kapanen only played together 6 or 7 games last year. They didn't play together much, did they?
Not much, and there didn't seem to be any particular chemistry between them. No, Kapanen and Malkin seem to have some, and I
Yeah.
suspect that if Malkin returns while Guentzel is still out, that it's entirely possible that we'll see Kapanen, drop down to Malkin's line, and somebody else play with Rodriguez and Crosby. But that's probably just a wee bit down the road. At this point, Malkin still hasn't taken contact, so I don't expect him to materialize in the lineup in the next day or so.
Dave, do you think part of it too is last year toward the end of the season, Malkin was kind of banged up, and then he came back, and then it seemed like, if my memory serves, he got hurt almost right away, didn't he not? Like Jared Tenorti hit him. He kind of, and then just kind of, he missed a couple of stretches toward the end of the year, did he not? And I'm wondering if part of that is why they're being so slow with this one, as to make sure he's all the way back.
I don't think they're being, unnaturally slow with getting him back in the lineup. I that would be foolish. I think what
Yeah.
they're doing is following the advice of their medical people for where his recovery stands. Um, there's really nothing to be gained by holding a guy out, after he is medically ready to play.
Yeah.
Assuming he's also mentally ready to play. I can't imagine that will be an issue in Malkin's case.
Yeah.
If you just watch him during his workouts, he looked a couple of weeks ago, like he could, perform at a level that you would expect from him. But, we don't know how structurally sound his knee was. I assume the medical people monitor that on a pretty regular basis. And,
Yeah.
when it's decided that he's ready to take contact, and then, that he is ready to return to the lineup, I suspect that, that will happen at the earliest opportunity.
All right. Just getting started here on the 66 to 87 podcast. When we come back, we're going to talk about Casey DeSmith finally getting a win, Jim Rutherford finding a new home, and do the Penguins need a little bit more from their defensive players as far as some goal scoring? So stick with us here on the 66 to 87 podcast. Welcome back to the 66 to 87 podcast. And Dave Molinari resting up after that long trip, that 4-game trip where he had got less sleep than a rock star, going out west with probably not quite as much fun or after hours parties. But Dave, you did see a win there at the end, and you saw a very important win for Casey DeSmith. And I thought it was interesting in a game where the Penguins scored 6 goals and took it to the Kraken right away. A lot of people probably would have focused on those goals and all that explosion, but I thought you wrote a good story, really focusing, narrowing in on Casey DeSmith. Why do you think that was that important, and how what maybe can that win do for his confidence?
Well, I mean, that's what makes it so important is the impact it could have on his confidence. I mean, one good game isn't going to completely restore a player's confidence any more than one bad game is likely to completely destroy, the confidence of a guy who's been on a good roll. But DeSmith needed something good to happen for him. Yeah, he had been 0-3-1 going into that game. His goals against average was nearly as high as his save percentage. Uh, he had just gotten off to an awful start, and his situation with the challenges were compounded because Tristan Jarry has been playing so well. That the Penguins have wanted to use him as much as was realistically possible. And when you're a guy, trying to get your game back in order, you want to play. And, but with Jari getting so much work, DeSmith wasn't getting much of an opportunity to try to get his game back in order, during games, which is where you do it. You can practice as much and as hard as you want, but you really can't replicate game conditions. So he needed
and
some
we and
work
we
in games just for his technical skills, and he needed a strong performance like he had against the Kraken, just for his mental well-being, for his confidence.
and as we record again, I would expect or anticipate um, uh, Tristan Jarry to play in Washington on Friday. It's They have a back-to-back situation where the Ducks come into town. Ducks are a pretty good team. They come into town Saturday. I would assume DeSmith then.
You would think, Mike Sullivan never tips his hand on his goaltending plans until the day of the game. Um, it seems reasonable, though, to expect that Jari and DeSmith will split the weekend starts. Which guy plays which game? It's hard to say. If I had to bet, I'd say Jari and Washington and DeSmith at home against the Ducks, but you know uh, that's purely speculation on my part.
And here's the other component to this is not only do they need uh, DeSmith to be able to occasionally spell uh, uh, Jari. I think the next opportunity, I think there's a back-to-back in the first week of the New Year, like the 7th or 8th. But what happens if Tristan Jari gets hurt? This situation just happened with the Rangers. The Rangers are off to this great start. Igor Shesterkin is one of the best goalies, he's, at least statistically, in the league to start the year. And down he goes again. And Georgiev has not been playing well. Now is playing and is actually played better because he's getting some games, as you just alluded to. You can practice all you want, but you're really going to show yourself in the games. They have to get Casey DeSmith going in case they were to lose Jari for a stretch. Because my goodness, imagine losing Jari and DeSmith playing the way he has been to start this season. That would be an absolute terrible double whammy.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why. I mean, you have to use DeSmith more often than just when you have games on consecutive days.
Right.
It's not realistic to have him split the workload with Jari or anything like that. Jari is clearly playing better of the two, and is the undisputed number one guy. But you want your backup to be able to give you 15, 20, 25 solid games a year, because you want to keep your go-to guy fresh, for the stretch drive and the playoffs. And DeSmith has shown in the past that he's capable of doing that.
Yeah.
It's not like the bar has been set unrealistically high for him. He just wasn't clearing it through the early weeks of the season. But his game in Seattle, I think, had to be encouraging not only for him but for his coaches and teammates.
Real quickly, news item for the last couple days. I know you wrote about it. Friend of the podcast, Jim Rutherford, uh, who won a couple of cups here, had a nice run before resigning early last season. Back in the league, a team executive in Vancouver. Dave, what do we know about that role that he's going to have with the Canucks?
Well, he's president of hockey operations, which is the role that Brian Burke fills with the Penguins now, and he's interim GM, which
Yeah,
I assume he will be spearheading the search for a permanent GM.
yeah.
It will be interesting to see just how aggressively he conducts that search. He never made any secret of the fact that he wanted to get back into the game.
Yeah.
Um, and I think he really enjoys being a GM. He's a very aggressive trader. That will be kind of fun to watch, to see if he tries to somehow get the Canucks into playoff contention. With some aggressive moves, and if he makes those, how they work out. Um, I don't expect him to be shy about making personnel changes there. So yeah, it's good for him to be back in the game. He had moved back to Raleigh, where he was the GM for a long time with the Hurricanes. Uh, but he's relocating to the other side of the continent, and he's got a big challenge there.
Yeah.
The Canucks, as the Penguins saw, last week, there's definitely some talent on that team, but collectively, it's a mess.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised that they actually waited as long as they did. And speaking of of changes, we kind of foreshadowed this last week. The change has been made in Philadelphia. Elaine Vigneault out right now as a former Penguin assistant, Mike Yeo. Mike Yeo
Yeah.
is in right for now, but I have to think that someone else is coming in there, because even in the couple games that since they have made that move, there's no sign of the Flyers getting any better.
No, I fully expected that Yo is, there on an interim basis. It certainly seems like the Flyers are interested in hiring Rick Tocchet.
Yeah, and they
Uh,
should.
yeah, um, he probably shouldn't have been on the market this long.
No.
It will be interesting to see how the Penguin fan base reacts to him, because he's adored here after his time as a player and then as an assistant coach, where he got a lot of credit for the productivity that they got out of Phil Kessel during his time here.
Yeah.
But if he turns up behind the bench of their arch rival, perhaps he'll go back to being one of the top public enemies, as he was during his playing days with the Flyers.
There's part of it privately. There's part of me that would love to see John Tortorella take that job. Again, I think Tocchet would be it's just natural, obviously being a Flyer guy. But can you imagine Tortorella coaching back in the division, coaching the Flyers?
And not only that, just Tortorella and the Philadelphia media would probably be more entertaining than the Flyers games.
Oh, I love him. I love the man. I know he's not real liked in Pittsburgh, but I think that would be fantastic theater. Either way, it'll be good. And either way, I think more changes coming in Philadelphia. Dave, here's this weird stat. We see this around the league every couple of years with teams that one year their defense is chipping in goals left and right, 5-on-5, and then it suddenly goes away. And that's right now the case with the Penguins. They were among the top teams in the league last year in a condensed season with goals from 5-on-5. I think they were in the top 5. I think Vegas, Edmonton, Florida, and Dallas were the only ones that had more goals. This year at 5-on-5, 3 goals from the defense. Is that something to you that is alarming, concerning, or it's so random in the NHL unless you have just a superstar defensemen in their prime who just blast shots in left and right?
Well, I mean, it's a surprise, certainly. I mean, that they, in 25 games, they don't have a defenseman with more than 1 goal, when you consider, that Chris Letang,
At
who's
even
on the
strength,
team.
I
Yeah.
forgot.
Well, even overall, they've gotten a total of 4 goals from their defense, 1 each for Letang,
There you go. Yeah,
Matheson, Pedersen, and Marino. Um, Letang and
yeah,
Matheson in particular, you expect to score more often than that, especially with Letang, who has gotten off to, in general, a pretty strong start this year. There were obviously a few games with some hiccups. Um, but in general, he got a pretty good start. And if you think Chris Letang, good start, 25 games, there's going to be more than 1 goal to show for it. But so, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to see that number rise. Um, I don't expect them to finish the season, with 13 or 14 goals from their defense, which is the pace they're on now. But no, I don't think it's a major cause for concern. I think if you're at a point where one of your biggest concerns is how many goals you're getting from
right.
your blue line, then you're probably in pretty good shape.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly that. That's kind of my thinking on this too. Although, just to kind of dovetail on our first segment when we talk about losing Gensel and finding ways to everybody step up, just getting a few more goals from the blue line would help. But I don't think it's a huge issue. But it is
And I
interesting.
don't know
It's
that
one of
there's
those
much
kind of
they can
anomalies.
change. Yeah, I don't think there's much they can change about the way they're going about their jobs to increase their goal output.
Right. That's
So,
why I'm saying it's sometimes it's to me that is a random stat. Again, unless you have somebody back there like a Brett Burns in their prime, or just we've seen over the years so many really good, talented offensive defensemen, especially before uh, back in the God in the coffee. Think of all the great defensemen who have played in this league. Brian Leach, uh, Bork, all those type of guys where you could every year you could pencil in 15, 20 goals, whatever. Ali Afraidy, my goodness.
Bobby
Uh,
Orr was okay.
yeah, Bobby Orr was okay too. But when you don't have one of those guys, and let's be honest, Chris Letang, like you said, is having a good season, but he's not 20. He's not the Chris Letang of age 26, 27. So uh, I just think it's a bit of a random number. There's years where it kind of it's nice you guys score some goals, but like you said, I don't think you can count on it when you don't have a group like this. Even a kid like Adam Fox, who's having a great season in New York, doesn't have that many goals. So as long as you're getting contributions, and they are getting contributions from the defense, putting up some points, it just hasn't manifested itself in goals. All right, we're getting we don't get into cultural wars very often on this show, thank goodness. But here comes one. Dave, the Friday night's game, I won't talk about it in present tense or past tense because I don't know when our fans are listening to it. Not on television in Pittsburgh, wasn't anywhere. It was on streaming. We spoke about this at the beginning of the year with ESPN and Turner coming into the league, um, uh, national broadcasting. But there's going to be a lot of times this year where games are only shown streaming. So in other words, it's on your computer. It's on you run it through your if you have Hulu. This game will also app on your television, or you run this through your television. Your thoughts on this? The fact that tomorrow night for a segment of the fan base that ESPN Plus and Hulu are both subscription sites, you have to pay extra for this to watch this game. Your thoughts on this?
Well, since I'm not sure that my dial-up internet connection, will support. I do not anticipate watching the Penguins Capitals game. Um, I'm sure that this is. I mean, obviously they're trying to attract younger fans who are more accustomed to watching things on their laptops or on their phones. Um, you know, that's where the future is. It goes without saying.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um, but for fans of my vintage, a lot of us simply will get by without watching a Friday night hockey game.
Yeah, I think this is, and we've seen this as a soccer fan. I'm have become accustomed to this with Peacock, the NBC kind of version of that, where You have to stream it. If you want to watch every game, you have to have Peacock to watch your favorite teams every game, and at least in the English Premier League. John Buccigross, who we had on the show back in July, had a great line, and credit Taylor Haas for putting it in her story the other day. His remark was, "I'm sure there are going to be some 64-year-old Penguin fans who are going to sit down and watch the Penguins and Capitals and find out it's on ESPN Plus. They're going to call their son and daughter and say, 'What's ESPN Plus and how do I get it?' There are going to be some interesting phone calls." I think he's dead on. I think tomorrow night there are going to be some well, we're recording this on Thursday. There are going to be some fans that are like, "Where in the hell is the game? And why is it not on television? This is America."
Well, I wish I could tell you that I disagree, but I don't. And I'm not sure that my kids can tell me what ESPN Plus is. So,
and my wife's not happy already. She's not happy. And like, again, I like, Denise, we can watch it on ESPN Plus. We can watch it on our lap. No, it's just like, there's problems. So, and you can tell my wife and I are both in our mid 50s. And this is not going to be good tomorrow night when we have to watch it on a laptop. But such is life in 2021. All right, when we come back, we will be joined by a guest, Sean Shapiro from The Athletic. Please stay with us on the 66 to 87 podcast. Back to the 66 to 87 podcast, and as promised, joined now by Sean Shapiro. Does a terrific job covering the business of the NHL for The Athletic, and wanted to have him on especially today with the Penguins playing their first game on ESPN Plus, in which that it will be the only way you can watch it. You cannot watch it on television. And I can tell you from personal experience, this has been bothering my wife for 2 days. How do we get this channel? Where are we going for this? How do we have Hulu? So I know if it's causing anxiety in this house in Columbus, Ohio. There's probably some people elsewhere in the Penguin fandom that may be a little bit older that are like, all right, what am I doing here? Sean, my first question to you is this, since the ESPN announced their deal, and they have been on I believe at least last year were on ESPN Plus as well. Do we have any sense at all of if the NHL is driving some subscriptions to their streaming platform?
Yeah, it's for starters, Tom. For starters, I'm actually surprised that your wife would have any surprise for it. I know you guys watch enough soccer in your house.
I do.
But it's hard to find causation versus correlation sometimes with this ESPN Plus and the NHL deal, because right now the only people who get access and the only time we see the ESPN Plus numbers are when Disney does their quarterly calls, and those numbers have been going up and everything like that. Each time the numbers are better and everything, and ESPN will say hockey has helped and everything like that, but we have no proof. There's no the only people that have physical proof of, hey, we're getting X amount of subscribers from the hockey fan base are the people at ESPN. And so I haven't seen numbers on that. I'm sure the league has probably seen numbers on that, but it's hard for us to get an exact how many new subscribers to ESPN Plus are there just for the NHL. Because if someone subscribes, say someone was looking to pull the trigger and really pulled the trigger for Bundesliga or whatever, but then also decided, well, I'm going to watch a lot more hockey because of it. How do you count that person? So it's hard to find exact causation, and for whether it's moral of the story is the streaming business and the sports streaming business is not going anywhere.
Right.
And I think with the hockey world is basically becoming the kind of the North American forebearer for people who aren't soccer fans. I think people right. So if you're a soccer fan, if you're a fan of an English as I'm sure you know, Tom, if you're an English Premier League fan, if you want to watch every one of your team's games truly,
Yep.
right now you need ESPN Plus, you need
Peacock.
Peacock, a cable subscription with NBC Sports, and if your team is in Europe, you also need Paramount. Like, so that's literally 4 different logins right there. And hockey, we're just starting to see. So really, the hockey one doesn't sound nearly as bad when you lay it out compared to the other ones. But hockey is basically the first North American domestic sport where we're seeing where this is going. And to be frank, it's something that it's not going anywhere for hockey fans. And if you're a basketball fan, even the new NFL deal has some built-in streaming things like this that goes into effect in 4 years. I believe. So this is just kind of a sign of where things are going. That we talked about, we're cutting cords and everything like that, but really you're just getting more and more logins, and that's just where it's going. And it's whether it's the right thing or wrong thing, you can debate that, but that's just kind of it's where the industry's going, and hockey is kind of the first domestic major sports league to jump into it just because of the timing of the deal, and they were the easy guinea pig since they were frankly in a spot where they needed to find a way to get 2 networks, unlike the other ones that already had 2 network deals before the most recent re-upping of major TV deals.
I think it also works in a way, Sean. And again, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but this may be more anecdotal than anything. But you would certainly have a better feel for this than I would or we would. But hockey seems to trend younger. You mentioned mentioned earlier about the soccer, and I think when you look at a lot of soccer fans in North America, even those that watch games in Europe, and hockey fans, they both trend younger than maybe baseball fans or the NFL fans. So I would think that this maybe has a more of a chance to work earlier on than, say, if you did this with Major League Baseball, which, let's be honest, a lot of the fans are older.
Yeah, and I think it's the one that doesn't have to do it. Where you would have the most pushback is the one that doesn't have to do it. It's the NFL, because the NFL is clearly king, and the NFL kind of has to nibble into this and get in. But I do believe that this really wouldn't work with baseball. It's the concept where if you ran to this baseball, you need to do it first, and hockey does trend younger than baseball. I feel if the NBA had done this, they probably would have had just as much.
Yes.
But I think the NHL with the audience and where it's going, you definitely have people who who are from an older demographic or don't really understand it that are going to take a while and may frankly miss games. Unfortunately, it's something where I think there's examples of this on a micro level all the time on radio places where, like, for example, the LA Kings 2 or 3 years ago, I believe, ditched to terrestrial radio. And I know the Kings still get complaints. The number has dwindled, but even into this year, they've gotten complaints of how do I find the game on the radio? How do I find the game on the radio? And so really I think the NHL has a younger demographic that's embracing it earlier. The one thing I think that did not, and this is whether you want to put this on the league or ESPN, you can flip a coin to pick who to blame for this. I think the issue has been the messaging and the understanding of this from the beginning, because this was all built up as a national TV deal in the spring, and everyone was all excited.
Sure was.
But it was one of those things where even at that time, it wasn't super clear until we got into the season of how heavy it was going to be of ESPN Plus streaming exclusives. And so I think the league and ESPN both didn't do each other favors in how it's been messaged. I think the fact that I had to write a story earlier in the season, how do I find the hockey game, is a pretty bad sign of how the messaging was. And so it's the same reason that, like, every Monday I get that email now of like, oh, hey, these are the games on ESPN Plus, where I just feel the need to tweet that of like, hey, if you're fans in these markets, make sure you're ready, because you have to make sure you're not going to be able to find it at the sports bar tonight. And that's the one kind of long lasting question for me on this is, how will restaurants and bars kind of translate with this? Because, like, if you can't find, it's easy to go to the bar and say, hey, throw the hockey game, it's on ESPN.
Yeah.
If you go to any random bar and say, hey, throw on ESPN Plus, they have to know they have to be ready for that. And so I think that is going to be kind of the interesting long-term development of this, is how do the public viewing, where one of the things that came out when this whole deal came out was like, oh, we're on ESPN, we're the sports bar default. Well, ESPN Plus is not the sports bar default. So that's another kind of nuance of this. But moral of the story is this is where we're going. And people in Pittsburgh, I know, as you said, it's the perfect time to talk about. Tonight's going to be the first time where there's people who are probably ready for it, and then there's going to be a large amount of audience. And I feel really bad for the people. I feel the worst for, actually, are the poor social media managers for the team accounts who get, whenever the game starts, like 5 minutes into the game, and they're have to manage 50,000 mentions of, I can't find the hockey game. Where's the hockey game? What the hell did you guys do? And like, I feel bad for them the most, because they're the one that take the brunt of it.
Yeah, we had we mentioned this in the last segment. We had Buccigross on in the summer, and he used almost that very line, not about the managers of the social media accounts, but hey, what channel is ESPN Plus? Where is this on my cable? So yeah, I do think the bar thing is interesting. We know, like with soccer bars, they are able to do this. They can stream it, but I think at hockey bars and places that show games, they're going to have to do the same thing. All right, quickly, let's move on. Just your initial thoughts as a hockey fan of how the presentation of ESPN and Turner have been in the first couple of months. Have you enjoyed what you've watched, or what sticks out, whether it be good or bad?
I think Turner has stuck the landing better than ESPN. Personally, I think the Turner studio show, it's not the inside the NBA level, but I think it's, if you're talking about, hey, that's being the varsity for Turner, this is the JV, and I think it's done a sufficient enough job. I think you talk about things that, once again, weren't messaged really great. I mean, they talk about bringing Gretzky on, and he's going to go about 4 or 5 weeks between appearances. The next appearance is the Winter Classic, I believe. And that's just kind of another kind of one of those weird things when you talk about, hey, we're bringing Gretzky in and everything like that, and you're going to go long stretches without him. It just kind of creates I don't know, because I don't watch every Inside the NBA one, but I don't think Shaq and Barkley miss 5 weeks. Like, that's just like, for example. So I think overall Turner's stuck the landing a little bit better. I think ESPN, I think the fact that there's a studio show is great. I still think ESPN needs to figure out I think the talent still needs to be figured out a little bit. Like, I feel like there's people who, I feel like they've had people doing play-by-play should be in studio, and vice versa. I feel like it's just kind of, there's still a landing that needs to be figured out on that for ESPN, while I think Turner's done a better job of placing people in the right start. Be an interesting question to discuss as they get into the playoffs and everything like that, because I feel at that point ESPN will either have learned from this or stick with it. It'll be interesting to ask that same question about 5 months from now.
Sean, a couple of days ago, the Board of Governors approved the sale of the Penguins to the Fenway Sports Group. What kind of reaction have you heard around the league just to the sale?
Yeah, it's the price point, I believe, is $915 million is what I've heard, and I think that's been pretty widely reported out there. And the true valuation is actually probably a little bit higher, since Mario and Burkle obviously are still having I believe it's going to be 5% ownership stake still. So the actual valuations may even be closer to $1 billion, but their stake, obviously, but they still have the 5% value. So it's somewhere between $915 million and $1 billion valuation. A lot of happiness, obviously, around the league because of a franchise that was typically considered 10 to 15th in value in the league. Selling for $1 billion is obviously one of those things that's rising tide is gonna bring all ships up. So a lot of kind of excitement about that. And obviously we saw there was the reaction, I think kind of a different immediate reaction in the outside sources that look at this stuff, and the Forbes and the Sporticos that do those franchise valuations. I mean, Sporticos had come out before this, but Forbes recently came out, and their overall values for how they had looked at franchise has gone up. So a lot of people who frankly already had a lot of money are happy, because they know that their investment is that their franchise is worth even more, and frankly probably worth even more than whatever any public valuation is out there. It's actually team is worth more than that, because those valuations, well, our estimates really only apply to a sale of a team if multiple teams were for sale. Like I think it was the Rangers were at $2 billion. The Rangers wouldn't sell for $2 billion. They would sell for $3 billion. Like it's just like when something, it's scarcity and everything like that. It's just kind of but if all 32 teams were for sold at once, then like a monopoly board style, those valuations be accurate. Otherwise they're actually higher if someone tried to sell it. So it was plenty to sell.
Well, I think the three of us should buy the Rangers then.
Yes.
FSG, the Fenway Group,
Mhm.
has I believe it's an 80% interest in Nesson in New England. Could you see them trying to buy the local Pittsburgh Sports channel, which is AT&T SportsNet?
I could see. I don't know the full ownership situation for Root. I don't know what the plan is there and everything like that. But I definitely could see from a Fenway point of view. I could definitely see that something of being of interest and of something that you would try to do, because we've seen a lot of that with the regional sports networks are a really interesting space right now. They used to be kind of a guaranteed cash cow for NHL teams, and they've become as regional sports networks have become, you see coverage disputes and you've seen disputes with valuation and teams like I know not as much with Root, but the Bally's, the Sinclair node ones have been really in hot water lately. So the valuations of the value of having those deals, they're not really the automatic cash cow they used to be. And so teams, I think, are starting to see that ownership groups are starting to see there's definitely value in finding the ways to maximize both. Look, and Washington owns part of their regional one. That's actually why Washington even founded the Monumental Sports Network as kind of a negotiating point to like, oh, look, we have another one. And that's somehow they were able to use that to Ted Leonis was able to navigate ownership of the local RSN. So I could easily see Fenway jumping into that, and whether it's something where they just own both them and Nesson under the same umbrella, or try and do something branding wise is a whole nother discussion. I don't think they would try to brand it. I think Nesson is too exclusively New England and has a certain vibe to it, whether good or bad, depending on where you're from, and that I think they would only want to keep with Boston. But that wouldn't stop Fenway from trying to put it under the same umbrella, I believe. And it just really comes down to kind of dollars and cents on the people who currently own Root and RSN in Pittsburgh and how they would kind of want to approach it. It's an interesting thing to track, and it's certainly something that I think Fenway probably has on their radar to at least try to discuss, especially since the Penguins, I believe, still have a good amount of time left on there. I don't have it right in front of me right now, but Penguins, from my recollection, still have maybe even a decade left on their deal. I'd have to double check that before saying anything super official, but I'm pretty sure it's a while.
Mm-hmm. And we've wrapped up the first 2 months of the season. As a hockey fan, what storyline has been the most enjoyable or interesting for you to this point?
So I will say it sounds like a bit of a cop out because Seattle's new, and I'm sure a lot of people would say that. But I went to Seattle. I was in Seattle about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and it was really neat to see just the environment around a new NHL franchise and to see how much they've embraced the sport there, to go and kind of, especially in a year where we've seen attendance issues, we've had some trickling attendance issues throughout the year. So we always knew that Seattle would come into the league well, but to see how they've kind of decided to take how they've worked to build a strong sport there already. There's the junior teams there, there's youth hockey there, but in kind of elevated, I think that's been a great thing to see. And just kind of go and see sold out buildings, even for a team that is looking like a traditional expansion team, is great. And I think that's good for the overall sport. And I think it's also it's an example that the league should remember and look at as it figures out the state of some other things across the league. And yes, I'm hinting at Arizona. Of you look at like the state of other things across the league, of there are markets out there that would embrace this and grow the sport, as opposed to some places where it doesn't work. And I hate to say it that way, but it's unfortunately true, where I think Seattle is a good example of this is how you do it right. And if someone's going to do it right, you should look into that. So that's kind of tying in my own beat and my own experience personally seeing a game. So I'll use that as a cop out there.
Well, fantastic stuff, Sean. We really appreciate having you on today. And I think the Penguins are back in March on Hulu and ESPN Plus. I'll just have my wife call you to figure out where to find it, or I'll bring up your old article here from a couple months ago. Maybe that'll help her out.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much to Sean Shapiro, also Dave Molinari. I'm Tom Reed. We will talk to you again next week on the 66 to 87 podcast.